point, I don't know if you want to do it first or after, can we talk about the discussion boards that are due next week? One of them has graphs and all kinds of stuff that I need some more clarification.
Okay, we're gonna go to them right after this.
Okay, thank you.
I've got it queued up to go to next. All right. So hope everybody's doing well. You've all worked through your questions for Salkind. You should be through with Salkind and getting to Miriam this week. A couple of you've already done Miriam. Started the qualitative book, so that's where we are. We're at February the 16th, case study 16. Next week, you'll be at home. As I said, you'll be at home. Those of you who haven't completed Miriam chapters 1 through 4, we'll go to discussion board Miriam. The second Miriam discussion board, we'll talk about it just in a minute. 2 weeks from today, we'll do case study 16A. And then the week after that, we'll be face-to-face back on Gardner Webb, Maine on Saturday and Sunday, March 16 and 17. And so, is that right? Or did we move that session? Let me check my calendar.
I think we moved it.
We moved it, yeah.
We'll move that one. We'll double check and make sure that on my calendar.
Didn't we move it up to the 9th?
Right.
Yeah, 9th and 10th, yes.
So, yes. So I've got it as the 9th and 10th, and so I'm going to go ahead and make that change on this schedule right now. Delete. That's why I had it on that week. Delete 10. So that's my understanding right there. All right, so that's where we are. That's what I have on my calendar. All right, and then spring break, and then move on. So that's where we are for the next 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks. That's where we are. Anybody have any questions? We're all in agreement that we've moved that one to the 9th and 10th, so everything is good. You should be to Miriam by now. If you should be moving into 1 and 2 on Miriam. So to that end, I have discussion board pulled up. And so you should have already started or be done on Miriam 1. Miriam 2, so develop a graphic for each of the other types of qualitative research discussed in this chapter. Is that your question, Lori?
Yes, that's my question. How we post that, how we do that, on a discussion board?
I would create a document, and you can add documents. You can, on your thread on discussion boards, you can upload documents. Let's see. When you go to create a thread, it will let you upload your document, as you can see. And so your graphic is a graphic, not a graphic organizer. Graphic organizers go with quantitative work. Okay. With qualitative work, we develop graphics, pictures, just something in a picture form that represents the idea. In the past, students have gone online and found pictures of things that represented the ideas that they were trying to convey. It's just that simple. Remember, qualitative is interviews, observations, and documents. And I'm just having you create a document. I would use Word or some other format, and you can just, or you could use screenshots of pictures. But that's the whole idea here, is iconography. Iconography is a whole discipline within qualitative studies, just pictures that convey a message. That's why, again, we convey data in quantitative format in one of three ways, either as a result of interviews that we did, observations that we did, or documents that we found. Interviews, observations, documents. And I'm just asking you to find a document, a picture, an icon that represents what you're trying to convey. That's a most overlooked part of qualitative research. And that's why I had you doing that one specifically. And I'll tell you where this comes into play in real life. For those of you who work in, well, we all work in areas where we have to have accreditation. When you enter data for accreditation, they want icons, they want artifacts, they want proof that you did. An evidence is a written narrative that explains what you did. An artifact is a work product, an icon, a thing that represents an idea or represents proof of the work that you did. That qualitative work is a big part of accreditation. In our accreditation for CAPE, we have to upload all of these artifacts, and that's a big part of the proof. Just like numbers are proof on the quantitative side, pictures, icons, things are proof on the qualitative side. When we have students do a clinical portfolio, and they have to do certain work, they have to write a narrative, but they also have to upload the artifacts that would be produced by having done that as proof. That's the qualitative piece. Lori, does that make sense? Lori, questions about that?
No, that makes sense. That answers my question. So
Okay.
we can find images
Yes.
somewhere. Okay.
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yes.
Thank you.
And just do screenshots or copy and paste.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So that's where we are, and you can just attach it, and that's to your thread. You know, make a document out of it, browse my computer, go to your file manager, and upload it. All right. So that's where we are. We should be moving into 1 and 2 on Miriam. You should have wrapped up Salkind. So that's where we are on our weekly discussion boards. Okay. So now let's talk about milestone 6. All right. So I don't care if it's just one, if you put it together in one document, your milestone 6 and your qualitative and quantitative. But the first thing we do, a detailed summary of the key assumptions on which your consulting project will be planned and executed. All right. We should be ready to answer this question now, since we just did Salkind. What would a key assumption, what would that be in the world of quantitative research? What would we call that? The dreaded H word.
Hypothesis.
There you go. It's your hypothesis. It's just that simple. What is it? Your hypothesis is swag, a wild guess, a key assumption that your research study is based on. I think this is related to that, or I don't think this is related to that, or I don't think this matters, or I think this is important. It's just your hypothesis. What is the central theme? What is the hook? What is important about your study? What are you trying to figure out with your study? What's the purpose? It's your hypothesis is basically the purpose of your study. It's your key assumptions. Now, how many hypotheses should you have is always the next question. After having read Salkind and gotten into this, how many hypotheses should you have? Anybody? Is this microphone on?
One.
Anywhere from one. One is fine. And what's the limit on the other end?
4.
4. 1 to 4. 1 to 4. You never have more than 4, and you have to have 1. And that's it. I mean, you define where you want to be in that 1 to 4 key assumptions. They should be documented and validated in terms of how we're going to define them. Our operational definitions, our terms must be in there. We have to define when we say effective, what does effective mean? What's the operational, what's our operational definition of effective, or what's our operational definition of meaningful, or what's our operational definition of what's our metric that we're going to use to measure with? We have to outline all those things. Our key assumptions are our hypothesis, and we have to fully define that hypothesis. If there's a term in there, we have to operationally define it, especially if it's measurable. We have to do restrictions or constraints, time, money, access. In a dissertation, we call those limitations. You've seen those before. We call those limitations, or for our purposes, we call them constraints. We did a SWOT analysis, so we know what those are. Those are our threats, our weaknesses, and so that's where your SWOT analysis come in. Resources, limits to funding, basic expertise, conflicting mandates, lack of, all of those things would be threats or weaknesses. So we're looking for those. This will define the parameters of what we're able to do. And then when we move through these, this is kind of the setup. Here's our hypothesis. We start with that, and then we define those terms in our hypothesis, in our operational definition, so we have a metric, or we know what we're looking at. And then we go to our weaknesses and our threats, which are constraints. And then we move into our qualitative methodology, and then finally into our quantitative methodology of the data that we're going to collect and how we're going to use it. So that's what to do this. That's why I said this can all be in one document. It just flows right through. I told you the first time we met, when we got through Salkind, this would make sense. Once we worked through all this so that we understood how a research project works, that this would be fairly simple. So now you can see, oh, this is not hard at all. Now that I know what I'm doing, this is fairly easy. All right. And David and I were talking as we were coming on this morning that somebody else might have collected your data for you. That's just gravy. That's just, oh boy, that's good. That's just less work for you. I mean, we hook on to big research studies all the time, and write consultancies or dissertations out of somebody else's data. Saves us a lot of time and trouble, money. No problem with that. It's according to what you're going to do with that data. And that's the important piece, is once you get it, what are you going to do with it? My job is to make sure that we're ethical in our treatment of that data, and that we know what we're doing with it, and then we go forward from there, and that we have a methodology that is both valid and reliable. That somebody can't poke holes in what we found because we use bad technique. For example, I might have mentioned I was at the They collect data every year in University 111. They do a freshman survey early on in their tenure with us at Gardner Webb, and they've collected the freshman survey data. And we were in that. We have a meeting of people who have interest in that, people like me that are supposed to be embedded in methodology, and so I'm got invited to that committee, and they were looking at the freshman data from the freshmen who enrolled at Gardner Webb in the fall, and they were looking at that data and their responses, and somebody said, we need to look at this to try to figure out how to get students who were not coming to Gardner Webb. And I said, whoa, pump the brakes there. This is a convenience sample. And they said, what do you mean? I said, this is not a random sample. This data only speaks to students who came to Gardner Webb. They're a different group than the students who didn't come. You'd have to have a random sample of college freshmen if you want to figure out how to try to get different, to get people who didn't come to your university. This data only speaks to the ones you've got. Now, if you want more like you've got, you need to do a analysis of variance to figure out what made these people come, and you can piggyback on that to try to find more like what you've got. But they want to use that data to try to figure out what new programs they ought to be offering to get other students to get students to expand their enrollment. Can't do that. That data will not tell you what you're missing to get people, because you've already got these people. They came for a specific reason. Now, you can find what reason that they came through analysis of variance, and it ended up being the biggest variance, biggest amount of variance, and the biggest reason that freshmen come to Gardner Webb is they're connected to the Baptist church. That's not the only reason, but over half of them attend the Baptist church. So if you want more like you got, where you got to go to get them? That would be the Baptist church. Pretty simple. But you can't take their data because it's a convenience sample, not a random sample. It is not representative of the population of 18-year-olds at large. It's only representative of the ones who came to Gardner Webb. That's the problem with the convenience sample. So if you want to find out what programs you should be offering to get students to come to Gardner Webb, you need a random sample of all 17 or 18-year-olds that are in your demographic range, and then find out from them pretty much why they didn't come to Gardner Webb, what programs that they would have wanted. That's how you would determine what new revenue streams you would develop. Again, it goes back to population and sample. I told you that population and sample is critical to all research. The whole idea of inferential statistics is to infer or look at probabilities. It's based on probability. And that first probability is how representative of the larger population is your sample. The freshmen at Gardner Webb are not representative of the larger population. They are a convenience sample. I mean, if you understand population and sample, you can be a lot more intentional about what you're trying to figure out and what you're trying to determine. Convenience samples only work on trying to find more of what you've already got. They do not lead you into new areas. That is one of the limitations of a convenience sample, or constraints. That kind of gets back to, they didn't pass the first test. When was, what are your constraints? Well, we're limited by, we only have data from our students. Well, the value in that is to find more of them, is to figure out what is the determining variable why they chose to come to Gardner Webb. And it was overwhelming the Baptist church. So, but then the admissions lady that was there said, but we can't buy data on students sorted by religious preference. And that's when I said, that's not the purpose. That's not the point. Buying data won't help you. If you want more Baptist kids, guess what you got to do? You got to work the Baptist churches. Well, they've got one man, and he's like me. He's about 100 years old. He can't even drive at night. So what's the chances of him getting out and working the churches and getting more? But they don't understand population and sample well enough to understand that you can't buy data. I mean, you can't buy names. You've got to go out and actually create a qualitative link with these churches. And so, you know, I can only help them so far. As I explain to people sometimes, I can lead a horse to water, but I can't shoot him. You want to, as dumb as this crowd is. It's a wonder I didn't lose my grip. I thought this is supposed to be professional people who understands things like this, but they don't. So this stuff, although it's commonsensical, it's not nearly as common as you would hope that it would be. And so you're just wasting your time if you're looking at your freshman data trying to figure out what new programs should we offer to get more students. Well, these people can't tell you. You already got them. They came for what you had. You need to find out for people who didn't come, why they didn't come, or people who potentially will come, what they want. That's a different sample.
Dr. Lamb, quick question. I don't want to get too far in milestone 6 and be not on the right path, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So is this something we're going to talk about in March? How far should we be along?
We're going to spend a good bit of time in March on this. That's correct.
Okay.
That's why I said today I'm giving you a month now.
Okay.
That's why we looked at our pacing. I told you we'd wait till today to talk about this. Once you got through Salkind and you understand some of these concepts and you've done your SWOT analysis already, and when you understand these concepts, and then I'm going to talk about qualitative and quantitative here in just a minute, that it would become a lot clearer in terms of what we would do, and then we'll spend some time, even if you haven't done anything other than just percolate between now and March. We'll talk at length in March, and we'll talk about each of your individual projects in March, because just listening to other people's is very helpful. So that we're going to spend a large chunk of time in March on this. That's correct.
So Dr. Lamb, in thinking about this, my project is mainly program development. So a lot of my data would come from quantitative studies.
Yeah.
There's a certain combination of qualitative and quantitative that we need to be looking at with those 4 key assumptions.
Well, you don't have to you don't have to do a lot on the qualitative side if what you're doing, but you're probably going to be doing some document review. You might be doing some interviews. You might be talking to people. Yeah. So there's your qualitative piece.
Okay.
There's your qualitative piece. All right. So now let's look at our assignments. All right, so there it is. Interviews, observations, documents. Your 2 or 3 page expository narrative describing the tool or strategy. How you going to do your interviews? Where are you going to get your questions? That's what we're looking for. And no fewer than 5 sources will be selected. One of the things that people make a mistake on in qualitative work, they think that just having a conversation that's just kind of free form is data collection. It's really not. You need to be scripted on your interviews so that for reliability's sake, so that you can ask everybody that you talk to the same things, and you need to make sure that you have them scripted for content validity so that you're actually measuring what you intend to measure. Your questions get the data that measures what you're trying to measure or the information that you want. So the biggest mistake that folks make with interviews is they think it's just a conversation, and it must be much more intentional than just a conversation. You know, we still have to meet the standards of reliability and validity. when we're doing interviews. And so that's where we start. You develop your interview questions, an observation protocol, or a set of documents to be collected and analyzed. Again, that's for validity and reliability. And then you use it, and you tell either how you use it or how you're going to use it. Your protocol is for reliability. That's it. Pretty simple. Okay, so this is the expectation for your qualitative that you write up, and then on your quantitative, again, you describe the tool along with all your operational definitions, the metrics, whatever you're going to use. You explore its history, how it's been used in the past, articulating its strengths and limitations. Arguing why the data kind selected promised to be useful. And then you collect and analyze your data, display your results in figures. Please remember that in data, all charts, tables, and graphs are labeled as figures, whether they're, regardless of, so charts, tables, and graphs are referred to as figures. That's how you show quantitative data. That's how it's expressed. You create a written product, with your summary, implications, and findings of your data set. Again, once you understand sample and population, once you understand validity and reliability, once you understand qualitative and quantitative, what it consists of, you're golden. I mean, don't overthink this. You've got this. You know what you're doing now. You're at a point where once you get to Merriam, you pretty much understand all the things that you need to understand in order to be able to do this. And so the best way to do this is just do one document that starts out with your hypothesis, kind of a rationale for why you're doing what you're doing, your hypothesis, your constraints, which are your limitations, basically your SWOT analysis, and then you speak to your qualitative data. If you're going to do interviews, observations, or look at documents, and your protocol that you're going to use that speaks to validity and reliability. And then your quantitative piece, you'll show that data collection in charts, tables, graphs, which are referred to as figures. Again, you'll address validity and reliability. And then you do an analysis, a summary of your data. You summarize your data in charts, tables, and graphs. That's where the charts, tables, and graphs comes, is you summarize your data in charts, tables, and graphs, speak to your findings and implications going forward. This would what would be called chapter 3 in a dissertation, or your methodology chapter. This is what this is. Milestone 6, along with these two pieces, are chapter 3 of a dissertation that we call methodology. And that's why I said 738 is designed to teach you methodology. You're not, and we're doing it at a level that if you want to get deeper, especially into the quantitative end, you can with the Salkine tests. But mostly, the practical side is it teaches you the methodology piece of your consultancy project, but it also teaches you the scientific method that you would use in real life situations when you wanted to conduct studies, or when you wanted to supervise people who do this kind of work for your organization. You don't have to be the number thumper, but you need to know enough how to supervise them and make sure that they are respecting the ethical constraints of population and sample, validity and reliability, and that they understand limitations, that you can look at methodology and say, yeah, this is good, or no, this is bad. We had a young lady come in recently who's applied for a quality assurance position within the School of Ed, and she completely used statistical significance in the wrong way. She didn't understand that. Again, statistical significance just speaks to error and chance. It doesn't speak to effect, whether you got much of a result from what you did or not. It just speaks to your technique. And that's what I'm working on with you in this course is your technique. You don't have to, I'm not trying to train you to do this kind of work on a daily basis. That's why we're using Excel, so you can learn to read those spreadsheets and do some things with it. If I were teaching you to do this on a daily basis, we'd be using SPSS, Statistical Package for the Social Sciences, as the basis of the statistical analysis for this course. If I were teaching you to do this on a daily basis, if you were going to be a quant, I'm teaching you to be the supervisor of the quant, and that's why we're using Excel. But you are learning methodology, data collection, all these different things. You are learning, hopefully, how to treat and handle data, but from a supervisory role. But I am teaching you methodology this course, and all the pieces that come with it. Is the picture becoming clearer in terms of what the expectation is in terms of methodology for your consultancy? So again, to kind of summarize this morning's benediction, if somebody else has already done your study for you, or already conducted a study, that's a good thing, not a bad thing. Again, I don't need you to be the quant. I need for you to be the person who can summarize it, make sense out of it, analyze it, and tell us what we're going to do with it going forward. It's immaterial as long as we know how the methodology of how they collected the data. It's immaterial. Now, you don't have to, you can stop short of their analysis and findings. You can do your own based on the data. But that somebody else collected it for you is not a problem. We hope to have the impact on our organizations. The impact comes from the summary findings and conclusions, which would be known as Chapter 5. Chapter 3 in a dissertation is your methodology. Chapter 4 is presentation of the data. Chapter 5 is the most important chapter, which is summary, implications, summary findings, implications for further study. That's where we're trying to get you to. That somebody else did some of the legwork along the way is that's just gravy. That's just a good thing. All right. I've run 3 minutes over. Questions? You feel better or worse or the same? Or do you already know this and I've just been wasting 30 minutes of your life?
I say a little bit better.
Okay, good. All right, but again, we'll spend a good bit of time on this and walk through each of everybody's individual work when we meet together again. Bring all your things on your consultancy, and we'll meet and go through this, and we'll talk about it as a group. That'll be a really good session when we get together again, and you'll have a group of emerging experts here and one grumbly old man to give you suggestions. And it will be a fun day. This is kind of my reward in that this will be one of those days where I have fun. We get to talk about these things in real life. So I'm looking forward to it. All right. So today we were working on case study 16. I'll close these documents. And we'll get back to case study 16, measuring organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. All right. Whose screen are we going to view for your presentation? Don't everybody talk at once.
We can use mine.
All right, Jess is going to go. Thank you, Jess.
One thing, let me say, have to work at the hospital. I have to be there at 11 to take care of some mamas and babies. So if we're not done by 10:30, I may have to sign off a little early.
Oh, we're going to be done by 10:30.
Okay.
We always
Just checking.
that's the hard deadline. Is always. I told you we never go more than 90 minutes. That's why I said my part this morning was 30 minutes. I already had it, as you saw. I already had it ready to roll, so we'd be quick. And so y'all have got an hour, well, 55 minutes, and that should be more than enough since we only have one presentation.
Okay.
But yes, we're always done in 90 minutes.
I figured we would be. That's why I told him I could be there.
Oh yeah, we'll never go more than 90. That's bad adult learning theory to go more than 90.
All right. Can y'all see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, I'll start then. All right, so this is case study about measuring the organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. So we'll start with the facts of the case. So CAN is the Community Action Network, and they are just a large collaboration of nonprofit organizations, and they work with social services and community development. They call themselves a hub for the nonprofit community. So the main thing about this case was that nonprofits are under pressure to measure and demonstrate the effectiveness of their organizations. So the main part, or the main problem with this case, was how can this organization help those nonprofit organizations with their effectiveness. So there was a lot of people involved with this case. We're going to just introduce them here and talk about them later. So the consultant, who is just named the consultant, his name was never mentioned, was hired to research organizational effectiveness and help the CAN come up with how to measure that for their nonprofit agencies. Luke Sorensen is the director of CAN, and he is the one that asked for the consultant to help them. And then the next 4 people were consulted or collaborated with about how to measure organizational effectiveness. And that is Dr. Laurie Lewis, who is the professor at University of Texas. Lucinda Beckett is the director of the local United Way chapter in Austin. Larry Shale is the director of the Austin Foundation. And then Roderick Buffkin manages the large homeless shelter in downtown Austin. So some key issues that we found in the case that was causing pressure for the nonprofit organizations. So you have funding issues for the nonprofit. You have an economic downturn, which people were getting nervous. So there's an economic downturn. People were getting nervous. They weren't funding. They weren't supplying money to these nonprofits. There was more unemployment, so there was more demand on that system in the community, social services, and they had less money. The nonprofits were focusing more on various funding sources such as private foundation and government grants as alternative to those private donors that they were having problems with. And then, like we said, there's so much pressure to measure and demonstrate effectiveness, and so that's why they consulted with the consultant to help them determine how you measure that. Okay.
So continue with the facts of the case. The next move the consultant made was to examine a report from 2 university professors, which was one of the tied-on sources as research for this particular case, from Herman and Renz on nonprofit organizational effectiveness. And that effectiveness in that study was viewed as just being a matter of comparison, although it's important to differentiate among different types of nonprofits. Of course, one of these issues with a hub, there's a lot of different types of nonprofits that can be in their geographical zone that they serve. Another point made was effectiveness is multidimensional, and nonprofits should use many different criteria to measure it, as of course nonprofits vary in their structure, format, mission, goals, and objectives. Another point is effectiveness is based on board effectiveness, and using correct management practices like strategic planning and financial forecasting was viewed as essential in making boards more effective. That there's no universally applicable best practices that are applicable in all cases across nonprofits because, as we've discussed, the nonprofits differ in their scope and who they serve. Another point for effectiveness was made that social construction, it's only real in the sense that people believe and act as if the nonprofit was real and the effectiveness was real. The effectiveness does not exist apart from the beliefs and actions of other people. And if it's done right, it's viewed as a form of achievement for the organization as a whole. And then organizational responsiveness is a useful way for the measurement of nonprofit effectiveness. And then finally, on this slide, the level of analysis, whether it's interpersonal, group, or organizational, does make a difference when effectiveness is being measured for nonprofits. So after the study with Herman and Renz, then the case moved into the discussion with the individuals that are in that area. And that included discussions with Dr. Lori Lewis, a UT professor of communication. She pointed out to the consultant that she said the effectiveness is intimately connected with the mission of the organization. Missions of the heart of the identity of the nonprofit, and the nonprofits are effective if they fulfill their missions. But she also said that missions are difficult to measure for nonprofits. She also pointed out the ease to measure things are not always in place, but most important things can be measured. Many things such as the budget, material resources, and the number of clients that nonprofits help or service can be measured effectively. But for many nonprofits, the concerns about the quality of those services and the interactions with their clients, so that nonprofits are interested in impacting things difficult to quantify, like social improvement or personal well-being. So many nonprofits have ambitious missions that are difficult to measure, is what Dr. Lori Lewis pointed out. Lucinda Beckett, who is the director of the United Way and a member of the executive team of CAN, she was interviewed by the consultant. She said effectiveness for nonprofits, nonprofits do good work, but they must demonstrate to others the actual doing of good work for the nonprofit. We get back into that issue of how are the funds going to be raised? How are they going to demonstrate to donors the significance of what they're doing for work? So she pointed out that nonprofits must be able to measure and demonstrate to their stakeholders, especially the funding agencies, and that it's hard to quantify their type of work. Then that it really doesn't get to the heart of the issue. The issue is transforming people's lives who need help, is what she said was the key, but that is definitely hard to measure. She did point out that measurement is needed, but nonprofits also need to demonstrate the quality of the work apart from quantitative metrics. She said it's important to measure the quantifiable items that are possible, such as finances, material resources, personnel, certain aspects of their service delivery. But for other things, it's key to look at the relevant process and evaluating the overall quality of that process. And she did use an analogy of, she has a little, what they call, I guess, a Newton's cradle, a balanced ball desk set, where she moves one ball on one end and it has the impact indirectly impacting the other end. And that's the way she looked at it, as the analogy for the impact of what happens for nonprofits. It sometimes is not direct and is not easy to measure. Then the case moved on to the consultant interviewed Larry Schell, the director of the Austin Foundation. He was a former CFO and had more philosophies like a CFO would. He said that many of the partners need to move toward a business model of operation. And he said it sounds harsh to some people to talk about nonprofits in terms of efficiency and productivity, but the truth at the end of the day is nonprofits talk about finances and resources, and they need to have an effective way to manage these things. He said not everything can be quantified, but that doesn't mean nonprofits don't have standards and hold people accountable. And he also talked about successful nonprofits that could show a clear return on investment and consistently demonstrate their ability to move the needle on important community indicators like high school graduations and incidents of domestic violence. So he took a stronger stance in terms of measurement and more like a CFO, talked about return on investment from the donor's perspective. And then next, the consultant talked to Roderick Bufkin, who runs a big homeless shelter in the downtown area in Austin. He went on to say that effectiveness, doesn't like the trend of seeing a push. He didn't like to see the trend of pushing nonprofits to become more business-like. So he was the exact opposite of the previous person that was interviewed. Nonprofits aren't here to be an organization. They exist to serve the least of these in our society, and that funders need to believe in the value of a mission and trust nonprofits are doing good, important, and yes, sometimes inefficient work, which don't hold the nonprofits to meeting our numbers. The challenge for nonprofits is to continue to communicate with their funders and other stakeholders about the quality of our work and our contribution to society. So his point or perspective was different than the previous person who was interviewed, because he took much more of, I would say, a humanistic approach instead of a CFO, let's measure the numbers approach.
So when we look at the central problem of the case itself, we talk about how to effectively measure the performance of any nonprofit organizations. And of course, there's a need for nonprofits to provide more services with less funding. And the ultimate goal is sustainability. The issue is basically a performance-based funding from the stakeholders. We have to show evidence that we are effective in what we do, effective in the community, effective in outreach. So we deemed it kind of as a quantitative research versus a qualitative research project there. And it was stated that quality is difficult to measure in any nonprofit organization. And I think David talked about how you can measure things like budget, material resources, and those things there. But most nonprofits are, at least the ones that I've been involved in, this was kind of a general statement for me, most of them are not interested in outcomes, qualitative outcomes, more so quantitative outcomes they are. And there's a secondary problem that can exist here with missions of nonprofit organizations are varied and vast. When we talk about competition for the limited amount of resources that's available, with the changing economy and social climate, the funders are asking for more demonstrations of effectiveness and the resistance of nonprofits to want to move to more of a business-like model. The consensus seems to be that there is no consensus, idealistic nature of the work, but the doors must be kept open in order to help those in the community. And so the lack of funding ultimately leads to closing the doors of the organization. So some ideal solutions would be identify performance metrics, would create a relevant process and evaluate the overall quality of that process. We can do a quantitative study and look at the number of clients, budgets, and of course the material resources. We can begin to look at a qualitative study where we can questionnaires, interviews, and then also help with board development around the correct use of the management practices, such as strategic planning and values and mission and vision statements and financial forecasting. And then we have to get buy-in from organizational members and other stakeholders. In achievement of the organization is pursuing the right objectives in the right way and the responsiveness that's needed. And then we need to make sure that our mission is clear, because that's the heart of what we do as a nonprofit.
Okay, that's me. I'm trying to unmute. So learning objectives. The first one is to help you understand the complicated issue of measuring organizational effectiveness in the nonprofit sector. And Dr. Lamb, you'll like this. The first thing we need to do is to determine the operational definition of nonprofit organizational effectiveness. The consultant heard varying definitions from the nonprofit leaders, and they all truly believed their definition. And I think that was part of the problem, is people were not on the same page. So the second learning objective is to recognize the tensions in the nonprofit sector between the business-like approaches and the holistic approaches to service provision. So there are different types of nonprofit organizations, and effectiveness is multidimensional. So when we're looking at the two types, the business-like approach is all about efficiency, productivity, identifying objective measures, quantify activities such as operations management, financial accounting, the numbers served. And the opposition would say this is overly practical and difficult in the nonprofit sector. The holistic approach, which is on the opposite side of the spectrum, is the impact of nonprofits cannot be neatly measured. Direct impact is not immediate, and positive outcomes may be down the road. So when you're looking at doing some outreach and doing some stuff, you may not see that for years to come. You're working with, an example might be you're doing something in elementary school to improve the graduation rate. Well, you can't measure that for 15 years. And the holistic approach would say the purpose is to serve the least of these. That's the bottom line. And how do you measure that? So the opposition of that would say that's overly idealistic. The solution, according to the United Way director, is something in the middle. We need to find the middle ground between business-like and holistic. The third learning objective is to learn more about the role of communication and the social construction of organizational effectiveness. So the communications professor said communication actually plays a role in constituting the very relationships and organizational realities we take for granted. Effectiveness is real if people believe and act as if it is real. It becomes reality. So when we look at that, how is that measured? Is it the good reputation of the organization, the good reputation of the board members, the staff? Are they known for helping people in the community? Is that enough? How is that qualified? How is that quantified? And what is achievement? And so the reflections on all of the learning objectives are this. CAN decided to measure, and I think this is an interesting piece. They decided to measure organizational effectiveness when funds were decreased and the needs for services increased. Before that, this did not come up, or that was the beginning of the case study. So all of a sudden, we have less money, we have more needs. Let's figure out who's effective. So the issue is trying to provide more services with less money. Their approach to this is to determine if the services are working by measuring performance, thus holding the organizations accountable. When you look at the underlying assumption of all this, might be those that do not measure up will be funded less. So I think there's some anxiety and some concern with the nonprofit organizations. All of a sudden you need to be measured and held accountable. The problem is measuring nonprofit effectiveness is difficult. Some of the improvements are not tangible and quantifiable. So if we think about that being how this all started, is there another way to provide the needed services with less money beyond the quantifiable accountability with program evaluation?
Okay, and I'm looking at the discussion questions, and I'll do 1 through 3. So the first one asks, as a consultant, what recommendations would you make to the nonprofit sector regarding organizational effectiveness? First part is maybe put together a donor package that includes evidence of effectiveness, and it would have emphasis on the strategic planning, finances, and outcome data. Understand the economic and social climate of the area that you're serving and of the individuals. Examine and realign the mission with work being done. And is the organization actually fulfilling its mission? And is it being communicated at all levels? And then review processes and evaluate the quality of the processes. Assess the engagement of all stakeholders, and any gaps that you identify would actually need to be addressed. And then question number 2 asks for a definition of social construction and kind of how this all relates to organizational effectiveness. And to understand the effectiveness is created through the interactions of various stakeholders within the organization. And there's not necessarily a quantifiable definition of its success. However, the individuals doing the work actually will communicate with one another if something is considered successful or not. And this is through language and giving meaning to an event that particularly has a successful outcome. And oftentimes this is on a case-by-case basis. It could be situational, and it's going to be grounded in the relationships and the communication. And communication is the key for delivering or sustaining the picture of what success, failure, and effectiveness looks like in a given organization. And question number 3 asks you to look at the important stakeholders within the nonprofit sector and how these stakeholders are related to the idea of organizational effectiveness. So if you look at the board, they're important from the standpoint of policy formation, strategic planning, program monitoring, financial planning and control, resource development, board development, and dispute resolution. And then you have your funding sources, and that can come from private foundations and government grants. You know, ensuring that they are getting the bang for the buck. They want to know that the resources that they're putting within the organization are actually being used for specified activities, and actually an outcome is being seen through the input of their resources. And then leadership, tasked with motivating and inspiring the workforce, a clear and concise communication, team building, mentoring, adapting to and leading change. They provide a clear vision of strategic direction of the organization. And your employees, you know, are they engaged in the work? Is there dedication there? Do they perceive their work as being significant and meaningful? Are they meeting the needs of the client? Are you having good customer service, buy-in to the mission and the vision of the organization? And then they also have influence over the organization's reputation. What are they saying about the organization to clients, but also out into the wider community? And you have your clientele, so client satisfaction and an organization's ability to attract and retain customers. The nonprofit will continue to provide a service for those in need if the clients are giving them good recommendations or feedback. Clients provide feedback regarding the quality of care that they are provided, and they rate the organization based on performance, adaptability, and mission, and they can make or break an organization's reputation. And then volunteers, they are actually an informal base of the organization. They help spread the message of the organization, know and apply the policies and procedures of the organization, the actions and behaviors aligned to the mission. And they could also be the very first interaction that a client has with the organization, depending on how it's set up. And then the last part of question number 3, how do nonprofit organizations need to be perceived as effective by these various stakeholders? So there needs to be a clear mission and a clear purpose. There needs to be an ability to perform the key functions, strong practices, procedures, and policies, financial accountability, governance and strong leadership, organizational and program development, skilled and talented workforce, and then the ability to mobilize others.
So question 4 deals a little bit about performance metrics. So it says, how does performance metrics, how is it relevant to nonprofit organizations? So we felt like you have financial statements in that, you have audits, budgets, and reviews, through employee evaluations, program evaluations, client and volunteer surveys, and then reports as well. And are there other measures which cannot be quantified? And that will be organizational documents, you have policies and procedures, strategic planning, and visiting the organization through observation, informal interviews, and then by word of mouth. And with question 5, it said, do you have a nonprofit organization that you're familiar with? And when of course, when I read the case, I couldn't help but think about the 2 organizations that I'm familiar with. I serve on the board as the United Way, and I look at them as kind of a CAN organization. And then I serve on the board as the Math Academy as well. And you guys have heard me talk about the Math Academy. But when we look at nonprofit organizations, we talk about, and this was the United Ways, this is their allocations here. And this is the one in Cleveland County. 86 to 90% of the budget goes towards agencies and services and nonprofit organizations providing services in the county. And we have about 10 to 14% that's going towards personnel. We also have our resources. We want to make sure that we are aligned with the mission of the organization itself. Things that we're looking for will be high impact, skilled and talented workforce, community engagement and backing. Basically has a pulse of what's going on in the community, and just kind of learning and paying attention, on a solid plan, research practices, and following through. And then just kind of know who you are by knowing your mission. And there's some outcomes that can eliminate, that can actually show success, will be an audit or financial review, annual presentations, So what the United Way Board would do, when the Math Academy was trying to become an agency several years ago, the United Way, we were a grounds roots organization, and we had a mission, and we kind of went and applied for the agency status, and the United Way denied us, and we went back and asked them what was going on, what did we need to do, and they said we needed a strategic plan, we needed to show how effective we were, how community engaged we were, and so we came back and we looked at some outcomes, and outcomes at that time, we measured how many volunteer hours we had with our academy. We looked at also how much our budget was at that particular time, how many students we were serving. And then we applied again, and they denied us a second time. And this time they said we need to look at how effective you are with students and student engagement, and how you changing the lives of the students that's actually involved in the program. So we got together for the next year, and we looked at, Dr. Lamb, we did a pre and post test. We would test the kids initially at the beginning of the academy, and then we would test them again at the end of the academy to see the results of that. And then we followed the kids throughout the year to see how they performed in math as well, to see if what we did in the summer changed their perspective on math. And so we took that data back this time. And that third time we presented, they actually awarded us status as an agency, but they basically taught us how to become an effective agency within the community.
Right.
And so it was similar to this case study here. And so when I read it again, I thought about some of the things that we did there.
All right, so I will sum us up here. So lessons learned, nonprofit missions are notoriously difficult to measure. So there's no really black and white there. There's not a lot of numbers that you have to measure. Also, defining organizational effectiveness needs to be unique to the organization and their mission. It's unique, needs to be about that organization's mission. There cannot be a hard and fast rule for each organization, so that makes comparison very hard. And then I think we've talked a lot about communication through our time, through this program, and communication is key. It helps initiate and develop those relationships between the nonprofits, their key stakeholders, and then the people within the community. The end.
Very good. Bruce, I like that you understood that CAN is basically is code for United Way. That's exactly what CAN is. It's United Way. And in the era of dwindling donations and more people that need to be served, this one is timely. Now, I won't get too deep into partisan politics this morning, but one of the manipulations going on in our society today is unemployment rate. We've changed the definition of unemployed, so now our rate, appears to be microscopically low. Unemployment, when that's not actually what's going on a day-to-day basis. We've changed the definition now. Once your benefits, which have been greatly reduced in terms of the number of weeks, once your benefits run out and you go off the unemployment rolls, you're no longer unemployed, whether you have a job or not. That's why we're seeing historic lows in unemployment. It's not because people have work, it's because we've manipulated the actual statistic. We've changed the operational definition of what unemployed is. So you see, these operational definitions, they have real consequences in the real world. And so for whatever reason, the general public that's unaware of that believes that everybody's working now. That's not true. Unemployment is they don't have an understanding of the metric of unemployment. It is now only a term of who is getting unemployment payments for the 9, 12, 21 weeks, whatever it is. That is what the unemployment figure now reports, not who doesn't have a job. we have subtly changed the metric here for political purposes. So in reality, we have less people working now than ever before, but we have fewer people collecting unemployment benefits. So again, we got to go back to the operational definition of what is unemployed. I use that to say this. This case is real. The pressure is there. There's a lot of folks who are homeless or who aren't working, and there's a lot of pressure on organizations to provide services to them. There's pressure for money. Now, that's the social part of this. Now, from the consultancy part of this case, here's what's important. You have the quantitative side, which is David's side, the CFO side. How many clients are you serving and how much does it cost? Factored into that is the cost of staff and those things. And then you have the qualitative side. How much good is it doing on things that aren't measurable? What you've learned is there's no model that you just plug into. You have to create your own model as an organization. Now, if you're the consultant that's hired to come in and help people do a program evaluation to show how effective an organization is, first thing you have to understand is there are different stakeholders in an organization have different definitions of success. And that's where you have to start. You have to define from every stakeholder, every stakeholding group in an organization, a nonprofit, you have to find out from them what success is. For board members, you may have to do some board development, as you said. For board members, you ask them, what's the definition of success for this? Well, they've got a different opinion than the people who are hired to actually deliver those services. They have a definition, and the people who are receiving the services have a different definition of success. So success is not just a thing. It varies among different stakeholders in an organization. And that's where you have to start. And you may have to do some education with your board and those kinds of things. But in the end, as a consultant, you need qualitative, you need quantitative, but you need to make sure that you understand that you operationally define success in the organization. Then you can go about setting out to try to measure it. But if you don't have an operational definition of success, and it won't be just one thing, you're going to have to do different measures. I did a program evaluation on a nonprofit been a few years back, and we had to do everything that you talked about this morning. There was no comparison group in the district where we were doing this. We had to go to other states to find similar things so we could kind of get a comparison. We had to look at the people who were going through the program. Like Bruce was talking about before and after with students. We did a before and after. We also did match pairs with students in terms of here's a student that had the same demographics that went through the program and students who didn't. We even had to do so. We had to satisfy every group of stakeholders. We interviewed parents. We interviewed students who've been through the program. We interviewed community members. We went to other states and other places where they had similar programs. We talked to the people who were funding. What were they looking for? Everybody, to do a program evaluation, and that's what you're being asked to do here, you have to find out what everybody's idea of success is, and then build a metric around that, and even if it's qualitative, to answer that question or to meet their definition of success.
Now, Dr. Lamb, you make a good point, because we had to kind of disbar an agency because the committee on the United Way, we struggled with what was success of that organization. It's a rescue mission in Cleveland County,
right? And
they're very successful at serving clients. But part of the requirements would be if you're receiving over $50,000 in the United Way funding, you're required to do an audit every year. And so they missed their audit. They had some financial issues. They missed their audit. So we put them on probation for about 6 months to give them a time to get the audit complete, where they did not complete the audit. So we had a hard, fast discussion as to, are we going to eliminate their funding? And we did, based on the contingency that they provided us an audit. Now, they were able to do that a year later, but we kind of cut their funding. It wasn't based on services. It was based on budget at this particular time.
See, everybody has their definition of success. all the stakeholders, and it's different. And you have to hit all of those notes. And as a consultant, when you come in, you have to make sure that you understand that. Everybody that's involved in this, what is their notion? What is their definition of success? How do we operationally define that? And then we have to speak to each one of those things in the program evaluation. Let me say that one again. We have to define everybody's definition of success, what they're looking for in this organization, what from their perspective they're looking to get out of it. Then we have to develop a way to measure that, whether it be qualitative or quantitative. It may just be, we have to develop a way to measure it, a metric, and then we have to be able to collect that data and speak to each of those different stakeholders. And again, the CFO wants numbers. The church or the organization, some folks or the board, they want to know that you've affected the quality of people's lives. Everybody has a different part in this. And an effective program evaluation or an effective consultant understands that there's no one size fits all. There is no way to compare disparate organizations. There is no scale that we can just put them all on and come up with a number, and so that we can compare them. We have to speak to what folks are looking for in consultancy. To kind of summarize this case, and this is kind of a personal thing, and you take it for what it's worth. The paid staff of most of these organizations are quality people, and they're good-hearted people. But their number one idea of success is their job continuing. I said that to say this. How reliable is their data? How reliable is their methodology? Where in this would we most likely incur error in our attempts to measure organizational effectiveness? Whose data is going to be the least reliable? Who's most likely to put their thumb on the scale? That would be the paid staff. I've told you before, the least reliable form of data is self-report. And basically, what are you asking the staff of these organizations to do? You're asking them to self-report. That's, what is, as researchers and as leaders of organizations and consultants, who is our biggest enemy? Error. That we got it wrong. That our data was bad. It wasn't reliable or it wasn't valid. That's what we're always battling against, error. That's what, chance that we got it wrong, that our sample is not representative of the bigger population, or that our metrics are bad, or that our data is bad. That's what we're always fighting. That's the ethical piece of this. We're always fighting that. That social construction theory is you kind of create your own reality. What scares me about that is we can kind of do that with qualitative things, but we have staff who want to do what? They want to create their own reality with the number side of the business, unfortunately. So you've got to be into it enough to know whether the numbers are real or not. I'll give you my last example. What I'm talking about is we had a fellow who did the academic side of the data in the school system in Charlotte. And we were looking at high school graduation rate. I've probably told you this story before. We were looking at high school graduation rates, predicted high school graduation rates, which the state requires you to do. And it was coming out that all of our high schools were projecting a greater than 85% on-time graduation rate. And to the point where the community, it just couldn't be right. It doesn't matter what your metric is or it's not about your data. That just can't be right. And so when there was a backlash from the community and from the media, you know, the first thing that he said was, I've used the wrong data set. And they said, no, it's not about data set. And so what we found is he was manipulating the formula. Now, who told him to manipulate the formula? I don't know. But the state sends the formula. You simply plug your data in, and it projects, you know, how many on-time graduates you're going to have at a particular high school. He just simply changed the formula so that nobody would appear to be not doing their job. Again, the paid staff, you have to be most careful with their data. You have to verify their data because it's self-report. And again, our duty, our responsibility as professionals in the field is to fight that error. And we know that the most likely source of error is going to be self-report and from the people who are actually paid to work in the organizations. And the second most likely is the volunteers that work in the organization. Because everybody wants to believe that they're doing good. And they might have to put their thumb on the scale every now and then to get the results that they want. To Bruce's point, you've got to hold people's feet to the fire, especially on the measurable things like money. But you can't just take their word for it. That's why if we could take their word for it, we wouldn't need CPAs and audits if we could take your word for it. That's the whole point of CPAs and audits is we can't take your word for it. But we can't take your word for it that you're affecting lives either. We need to be out there and see it. So the most likely place for error is, of course, with the paid staff of any nonprofit organization. That doesn't mean that you need to be distrustful or rude or whatever. You just need to make sure that you verify the information that they give you. But to summarize this morning, you need to determine what success is to all the stakeholders when you start in any organizational effectiveness, when you're trying to develop some sort of indicator of how effective an organization is, whether it be for the organization itself or for their funding agency. You need to define what success is for everybody involved, and then go about determining the best methodology to collect data to answer those questions. That's where you got to start. All right. Did you learn anything from this case study? Did you see the application of qualitative and quantitative? And you see how they're used and when you use them, and that it's inappropriate and unethical to use qualitative to use qualitative language and terminology and things that could be measured quantitatively. That's an ethical issue. Using the wrong metric. It goes back to the example that I used when we were together last time about the Chevrolet commercial. There is a metric for car reliability determined by the Society of Automotive Engineers. They did not use that quantitative metric. They went out and did some qualitative work and fudged the sample to make sure that it would turn out their way. But overall, other than the ethical concern, the bigger, even if it hadn't been an ethical concern, the bigger issue was, why are you using qualitative terms in a quantitative metric here? We have a quantitative defined metric that defines reliability of an automobile. Why are you just going out and asking people? Simply get the data of how many times cars came back in while they were under warranty that needed work done on them. That's the definition that's accepted by the group, the experts in the field. Again, their definition of success is how many times your car's got to be worked on while it's under warranty. Again, that group are the experts. That's what they define success as. So that's kind of how that works. All right. Anything for the good of the group before we go today? Okay. So again, on our calendar, I'll be back with you on March the 2nd We'll Zoom again at 9 a.m. and then I'll see you face to face on campus on March the 9th. If you've got a biscuit order, let me know. See you in 2 weeks. Y'all have a good time. David, I'll see you Wednesday. What time we're going on Wednesday?
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock?
Yes, sir.
See you then.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.